Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and as a small YouTube channel, I tend to wear a lot of hats around here. And probably the one that I think I'm best suited at is the hat of educator. And that is the hat I shall don for today's video. One of the questions I get very often is how do I effectively break into those eternal formats? And we're going to talk about the most viable strategies out there, the difference between them, and most importantly, how those different strategies might be appropriate for you, because ultimately, I'm not going to decide how you use these strategies, you are. But before we get into all that, we here at the Stronghold are officially on the road to 1,000 subs. And guess what? When we get there, we're going to give away an account. So if you're part of the 2/3 of viewers that routinely watch my content but haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and get in, player, because we're going to be doing some magic. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Now, the first concession I need to make in this conversation is that eternal formats can mean different things to different people, or, well, really multiple things at the same time. In simplest terms, we've got the Explorer format, the Historic format, and more specifically, the Historic Brawl format. And we'll try and talk about those in different ways and how these different strategies can be applied to the different formats, sometimes at different levels of effectiveness. All of those things can be big changes depending upon how you want to explore these formats. One thing that really doesn't change is the way the various formats compare to one another. Now, when it comes to Brawl and more importantly, Historic Brawl, the singleton nature of those formats really tends to change the economics for those particular formats. So for this portion of the discussion, I'm going to be focusing on the 4 primary formats: Standard, Alchemy, Explorer, and Historic. One of the first defining factors of any of the formats is its relative size. Standard, of course, is pretty stable and stays between 5 and 8 sets by design. Alchemy by extension, and I apologize that the slide has a misprint, ranges from 11 to 18. Also, again, stable within that range as far as its size, and again, that is by definition and the rules of the rotation for Standard and by extension Alchemy. Explorer at its current size is 26 sets. Historic at 45, give or take a potential counting error on my part, but I think those numbers are relatively accurate. The growth rates are where Explorer and Historic really tend to establish themselves in very different ways. Explorer, since its introduction, is growing at a pretty steady pace of about 5 sets per year. Of course, 4 of those are the standard set releases, and then we're tending to see approximately 1 anthology or direct set for Explorer. Historic, on the other hand, is currently growing at a mind-blowing 11 sets per year. And frankly, that is continuing to ramp up year after year at an almost alarming rate, whereas Explorer can pretty much be expected to stay at about the same rate of growth. The remaining relevant statistics tend to base themselves on those format sizes and growth rates. For instance, Standard tends to have 3 to 5 format defining archetypes, whereas Alchemy has between 5 and 10 at any given time. Explorer would range most typically in the 10 to 15 deck range, and Historic has almost consistently 15 and often many more relevant decks. Individual card relevance is about 3% for Standard, 5% for Alchemy, 2.5% for Explorer, and just over 2% for Historic. So cards, when you open a pack, for instance, or you do a draft, or you receive a random ICR, any specific card has a varying degree of how relevant it's going to impact your deck construction with regards to relevant archetypes within the format. Standard being the somewhat norm at around 3%. Alchemy, because of its smaller size of Alchemy specific release sets, tends to have a slightly higher amount. And the sheer size of the formats within Explorer and Historic tend to drive those numbers lower. Similarly, with volatility within those formats, if we define Standard as the normal amount of volatility one expects in a format, Alchemy tends to have high volatility, again because those sets are smaller by comparison, and the cards tend to be more pushed and explorative in nature. Explorer has a lower volatility because it already has such a large format. Any one new set, one new card, one new ICR can have a much lower expectation to change what is going on within the format. Historic, on the other hand, has very high volatility, mostly because of the sheer absurd amounts of new cards that are being released to that set. With 10 new sets a year and an average over 200 cards per set, at least for standard legal sets, you could easily argue that Historic is getting 1,500 or more new cards each year. And that's just a highly volatile potential mess going on there. All right, so now let's talk about some of the more approachable strategies for entering into the Eternal formats. I will be the first to admit there are a number of very good budget archetypes that basically come from just one set or one pack. So buying packs would seem to be a pretty viable option by targeting specific packs and going after very specific budget decks. But beyond picking which deck / pack that you go for, you have very low control in this type of strategy. And the fact is, no matter which one you pick, you're more likely to get more cards that don't contribute to your goal than cards that do. With a little bit of simple math, well, actually, I take that back. The math isn't all that simple. It's actually kind of complex, and I'll save that for another video, perhaps. But one can expect to need to open about 40 packs from any given set to build one of these archetypes. And that makes one of these decks a very expensive 40,000 gold piece expected cost. And to put that into perspective for you, that's equivalent to about 6 weeks of effort on our plan, or nearly half of one season's budget earnings. But of course, the idea of buying packs as being a little less than ideal is really nothing new around here. And since these older packs are not currently supported by any sort of golden pack, you are basically giving up 60% of your potential value by going with older packs versus the new current packs right off the bat. That then would lead us to a drafting option, much like we use with our standard collection building. Because from time to time, Arena does offer premium drafts of older sets. Of course, those premium drafts usually don't come with more than a couple weeks worth of warning, and the time frame to do those drafts is usually somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks. So you don't have a lot of lead up time to get your funds together, and you've really got to be able to strike while the iron's hot. In other words, you got to have the money together to do it. And it's a good amount of money because, of course, premium drafts run about 10,000 gold piece each. And we know that doing 3 focus drafts will basically help you build a budget deck for a specific archetype. So building a deck through this drafting manner will run you about 30,000 gold per deck. And again, to put that in perspective, that is about a month's worth of effort following the plan, or about 35% of one's seasonal budget. That is still a very large number. Of course, there are opportunities to use tokens here for your Mastery Pass awards, and there is a 25% discount if you have gems to spare. So the reality is that from time to time, this will line up and come together as a way for you to add a deck to your arsenal within the Eternal formats. But unfortunately, it's not going to happen very consistently. The more control is very heavily outweighed by the lower access to these events. And of course, you're still spending gold at nearly twice the amount that you would be spending by drafting the more accessible standard formats. All of that actually brings us to the strategy that I use and recommend most highly, and that is to age in to the Eternal formats. That's right, just by following the plan and focusing your resources on standard card pool development, you will, over time, develop a huge Eternal pool as well. This particular strategy is much slower, but it does allow you to maximize control over your card selection and gives you the most possible access to the tools to grow your collection. Most importantly, it has driven my average deck cost down to just under 8,000 gold per deck, or about half of what you expect from a draft of, roughly 15,000 to draft into a particular archetype. And with new tools like Golden Packs, we can expect that value to go down even more, because that's the moving average for the entire time that Arena has been around and I've been playing it. So while it's slower, you will get more for your effort over time this way. And of course, we can't forget about the impact of wildcards on something like this. While wildcards can be applied to speed up any one of these strategies, it is very effectively used with the age-in strategy. See, I only use about 20% or so of the wildcards that I generate each season for standard development. The lion's share, or roughly 25-ish wildcards each and every season, are put into those Eternal formats, which means I can basically build a Eternal deck from scratch, or vastly improve an existing deck with wildcards 2 to 3 times a year, which is really all you need to start building up an Eternal arsenal. And folks, before you go, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on a thing. Because I know I can't change the Magic economy all by myself, but I think we can.